Hi, this is Miss Cairo. This is math video lesson 3-4. And in this lesson, we are going to be continuing to practice multiplying fractions. But before we get into our notebook or our activity books, and before we get to, practice again with that concept, we're going to be taking some notes. So, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to get out your notebooks. And the last time we took notes for math was from Unit 2. So, go ahead and open that up and find, our last notes was something to do with adding and subtracting decimals. And once you find the last page of your notes, what you can do is you can either like draw a line, skip a few lines and draw a line and start from there, or you can go to the next fresh page. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started with taking notes of the different ways we've been drawing diagrams and arrays to solve multiplying fractions and multiplying whole numbers times fractions. So once you find that new line or new fresh um, sheet of paper, we're going to title it, I'm going to put it in all caps, Unit 3. And what this is, the big idea of Unit 3 is multiplying fractions. So I'm putting it in bold. You can, or in caps, you can do the same. You can underline it, make sure it's just centered and really neat and visible for you to refer back to and know exactly where to find these Unit 3 concept notes, okay? And the whole purpose of these note taking, boys and girls, is so that if you're ever working on problems independently and you're stuck, you can go back to your notes and reference back to example problems, and look at some other previous problems and apply that to the problem that you're stuck on. We've invited you to use your notes throughout assessments like quizzes and tests, so you can use these to help you out on things like that. So I hope you're in a studious kind of mood, and I hope you're feeling determined to take some organized notes right now. Okay, so Unit 3, multiplying fractions, and what we'll do next is um, let's write out this sentence. I can use arrays and diagrams, basically drawings, to solve when multiplying fractions. Okay, I can use arrays and diagrams to solve when multiplying fractions. And in the previous lessons, what we were doing is we were multiplying whole numbers times fractions. So on the next line down, we'll do a number 1. And we'll write multiplying a fraction times a whole number. Number 1, multiplying a fraction times a whole number. So for example, anything with a numerator and a denominator times a whole number. Great. Do your notes look like mine? And let's use 2 examples. So one way of using an array to solve when multiplying a fraction times a whole number, well, we said that if the whole number and denominator, if you look at those two and the denominator is a factor of the whole number, we can split up an array and make an array to solve. So I'll give an example in a moment. So just copy this down right now. If the denominator, so the bottom number, is a factor of the whole number, create an array. Actually, I'll just put that. Here's what we're going to do if the denominator is a factor of the whole number. Do you see how I kind of put that over to the side? So I'm a little indented. Um, so here's an example. Let's take a look at this problem. 2/3 times 9. 2/3 times 9. 3 is a factor of 9. That means we can make groups of 3 evenly within, if we're looking at the whole number 9. So for example, remember this? I'll do it over here right next to it. We drew out a rectangle. What did we put at the top for this number? 9. Then we look at the fraction and we look at the denominator, and we're going to split our array up into how many total pieces for this problem? 3. So 1, 2, 3 pieces. Does yours look like mine? Make sure it's nice and neat so that you can refer back to this problem when needed. Next step, we're going to fill in these groups of 3s with numbers. So if I'm making 3 groups of 9, what would be the number in each of these groups? So 9 divided by 3 gives us 3. And remember, they have to be equal groups, and they are because 3 is a factor of 9. And then our last step, we're going to do some shading or some circling. And we're looking at the numerator now. What's the numerator for 2/3? 2. So that means we're going to shade or circle how many total pieces? 2. I'm just going to quickly shade. And then I look back and I think to myself, well, I shaded 2 groups of 3. So that gives me a total number of 6. And I just solved this multiplication sentence using an array. So 2/3 times 9, I just arrived at the answer of 6. So that's one way. And then in lesson 3-3, though, we were working with multiplying fractions times whole numbers, but if the denominator is not a factor of the whole number, we have to do a different kind of diagram. So go ahead and go to the next line and do B, and we'll title this if the denominator is not a factor of the whole number. We're going to draw a diagram. So go ahead and write out that sentence. That's B. Here's a different scenario. And again, if you need to pause, go ahead and do so. Here's an example. Let's do 5 times 1/4. 5 times 1/4. Now I'm going to preview and look at directly what we're always going to look at is the whole number in the denominator. I can't make 4 even groups of 5. 4 is not a factor of 5, so I'm going to draw a different kind of diagram, and we practiced this over a large portion of a lesson the other day. We're going to draw a fairly bigger diagram, make sure there's a little bit more room inside because we're going to do something a little different with this one. I hope you guys remember. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to write 5, but we're going to leave a little bit of space. I'm going to draw my 5 up here. And the reason why we left space is we're going to split this 5 into wholes. We're going to split them up into 1 whole each. And I'm going to split it up into as many times as I need to add 1 by itself to get to 5. So I'm going to create 5 groups of 1s. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 will equal 5. And then I'm going to go and mine's not so even. Hopefully yours is more even than mine. But with solid lines, we're going to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups. 5 groups of 1. And remember, the next step, we're going to look at our fraction over here. I'm going to use dotted lines to represent our fraction of 1/4. I want to split it up into fourths. So I'm going to use dotted lines. I'm just going to do it with my first whole just so you guys get a good idea. So 1 piece here, 2 pieces here, 3, and then 4. 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 1 whole. And we're not doing it just for this one hole, we're doing it for all 5. So we're working with the whole number 5 here. I'm going to continue that dotted line the whole way through. All my ones are now split up into fourths. And the next step is just like what we were doing up here. We're going to be shading. We're going to represent shade to represent 1/4 of 5 total holes. So if I do it with this first hole, I'm just going to shade in the first piece, one piece out of a total of 4 to represent, and I'll label it down here 1/4. Go ahead and do that too. Well, 1/4 of one hole is just 1/4. I'm going to have to continue down 1/4 of 2 holes now is 2/4. 1/4 of 3 holes is 3/4. 4/4. And last step is 5/4. And I labeled fourths underneath all together. And just like we did in the last lesson, we can use repeated addition to go ahead and add. I was doing it at the same time, so you probably heard me arrive at my correct answer, but 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. The denominator stays the same. Remember, the denominator is how many pieces each whole is split up into. So our whole for one whole, sorry, our denominator for one whole is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So 4 is our denominator. And then we add across, we shaded how many total pieces? 5. 5/4. 5/4 is an improper fraction. So we would use division to turn it into a mixed number. Can you do that mentally? Hopefully, it goes in one whole time with a remainder of 1, and denominator stays the same. So 1 and 1/4. 5 times 1/4 is equal to, go ahead and write that over next to your multiplication sentence. It's equal to 5/4, or in other words, which that also is equal to 1 and 1/4. All right. And then lastly, thanks so much for following along really closely. I'm going to hit to the next page. So make sure you have this all in your notes. If you need to pause, go ahead and pause. If not, let's keep going. Lastly, what we've been working on with this lesson is multiplying a fraction times a fraction. So go ahead and skip a line. And what we just did on the last page is we did multiplying a fraction times a whole number, and we used 2 different arrays to do that depending on the denominator and the whole number. What happens when we multiply a fraction times a fraction is what we're going to be dealing with right now. So our second scenario is multiplying a fraction times a fraction. And we can definitely use an array to solve this. This is what we were doing the other day. Remember, we were using 2 different colors. If you have a blue and a red coloring pencil or utensil close to you, go ahead and get that out. Let's solve for an example for this one. Let's do 1/3 times 1/4. And let's solve an array to solve this. How you're going to do this is we're going to draw a box out fairly even with enough room inside to be splitting it apart and to be shading. And what we were working on the last lesson is you take one of the factors or one of the numbers in the multiplication sentence and you're going to label it. I always start up on top. And again, it doesn't matter which one you choose to do first, doesn't matter the order for multiplication. So let's just start off with 1/3. Let's label our top 1/3. And I'm going to split up this box into thirds, and I'm going to represent 1/3 with this box, okay? So denominator is 3 here. So how many total pieces using vertical lines? So we want 3 And then again, as even as you can. So we want 3 parts split up vertically. 1, 2, 3 pieces. Does yours look like mine? Next step is we're gonna use a different color, and remember those diagonal neat lines that we were doing? We're gonna be shading in what 1/3 of these 3 parts looks like. So let's look at our numerator. Our numerator is 1, so that means we're gonna be filling in 1 piece here. And I always choose the first one. So watch me as I do it first, and then I'm gonna invite you to copy how I'm doing it. I'm just doing a few lines. The neater and the more simple, the better. So now I have clearly drawn out 1 piece out of a total of 3 pieces to represent 1/3. So go ahead and copy mine. Make sure those diagonal lines are simple and going the same direction. I'm not asking you to just fill it in really quickly. Make it concise. And then on the next side, so now we have 1/3 represented. I want to know what 1/4 of 1/3 is. So on the next side, we're going to draw the other factor, which is 1/4. Go ahead and label that. And what I want you to do is I want you to pretend like this is a blank box, that there's no drawings inside. Okay. And we're going to use horizontal lines to represent what 1/4 is. And remember, we're looking at this as if it's one whole. So 1/4 of one whole, we're going to use lines and shadings to represent it. But again, pretend like it's blank. So watch me as I do it first, and I'll talk you through. So 1/4, I'm going to split up into a total of how many pieces? 4. Denominator's 4. So watch me as I do it. 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, and I tried to make it as even as possible. So I have 1 part here. Watch my mouse. 2 parts. Actually, maybe I even do this. I have this tool. I haven't used this in a while. Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's a little too big. But here I have 1 piece here. No, it's too big. Never mind. I have 1 piece here. 2 pieces here. Maybe even I could just draw arrows. 2 pieces here, 3 pieces here, 4 pieces here. And when we shade, it's the whole piece goes from this side all the way to the side, okay? So we're going to be shading in 1 piece of these 4 that I just drew out. And again, I always go with the first piece that I split it up into. I'm going to split this whole piece, or sorry, shade this whole piece in with a different color with diagonal lines going the other direction. So watch me as I do it first. 1 piece of 4, or 1/4, looks like that. So go ahead and you can copy how mine looks like. Yours should look exactly like mine. And the last step is we are going to use this array to solve what 1/3 of, or 1/3 times 1/4 is. So we're going to do an equal sign on the other side, and we're going to do a fraction bar. Anytime you multiply a fraction times a fraction, you are going to arrive with a fraction as your answer. So you know I'm not going to have a whole number. I'm not going to have a mixed number. It's going to be a fraction with a numerator and a denominator. First step, what I always start off with is how many total pieces are there? Go ahead and count. Or you can realize that there's 3 by 4. 3 by 4 is 12 pieces. So our denominator is 12. Our numerator is going to be how many pieces are shaded with both colors, or another way of looking at it, shaded double times. How many boxes do we shade in twice using the red and blue diagonal lines? And it's just this 1 piece up here. Only 1 piece has both directions of the diagonal lines, or both blue and red. Okay, so our numerator is just 1. 1/3 of 1/4 is equal to 1/12. Okay, and that arrives us at our answer of 1/3 times 4. 1/3 times 1/4. Okay, so thanks so much for following along so closely with your notes. We're going to keep practicing this in class. and this will get more and more challenging. And I hope you're on the lookout for how can we just solve this with straightforward multiplication.